Hi everyone, this is Mr. Fukowski, and today I'm going to detail for you the events of Manifest Destiny. By no means is this exhaustive, but this will highlight some of the main events. And perhaps when you think of Manifest Destiny, at least I think of Texas being sort of the quintessential case because it sets up the Mexican-American War, which is very much started because of this idea of Manifest Destiny. So where we are at this point is Texas is still the Lone Star Republic. It's an independent country. And President Harrison, who is our president at this point, will actually die of pneumonia 4 weeks into his presidency. So his VP, John Tyler, will take over. And Texas at this point has been sort of in a weird state for 8 years, in that Mexico has never really recognized officially its independence. From the Mexican point of view, Texas really wasn't independent. It was basically a state in rebellion. So there was always the fear that Mexico would invade, possibly. It just wasn't known when it would happen or if it would even happen, but there was that potential. Texas, even at this point, was negotiating with Great Britain as well as France of potentially becoming a protectorate because of that reason, because you have a menacing threat south of the Texas border. So one reason why Great Britain is really interested in independent Texas, well, they want to benefit economically. They see that, well, if we can get around, these tariffs that are being imposed. So think about Henry Clay's American system, which is taxing British imports, or I should say British exports to the United States. They could sort of circumvent that. So that's an interesting possibility that Texas could have fallen under British protection. Obviously, that does not happen, and by 1845, Texas will become our 28th state. But how that happens is a direct result of Manifest Destiny. In that, officially, that it is the belief that God had destined to expand the country from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean. So we're, not just dealing with 13 colonies or 13 states at this point. We are pushing west of the Appalachian Mountains. We're then going to be pushing west past the Mississippi River into Texas and eventually California. Perhaps the president most associated with Manifest Destiny is James K. Polk. He's your land-hungry Democrat. He's a firm believer in Manifest Destiny, and really where he focuses his first attention is in the Oregon Territory. Some of his goals include, of course, settling the Oregon dispute, acquiring California, and amongst other things such as lowering the tariff and restoring the independent treasury. But perhaps the most important ones would be completing Manifest Destiny, which he successfully does. So the Oregon country, even though it's this whole great debate, it really only focuses on the northwest corner of the Oregon Territory, the border dispute being the Columbia River. Now you'll notice that the Oregon Trail cuts right through Oregon and basically splits it into half. So what you have at this point is you have a number of American immigrants going to Oregon in British territory, and soon you have more American migrants than British settlers. So this bolsters the American argument that this should be sort of absorbed into the United States, not necessarily right away as a state, but definitely as a territory. So it's really just this northwest corner of land that is the argument. And the British were using it for trade, while the Americans were looking to settle there for land and resources, of course. Ultimately, the 49th parallel will be agreed upon, so Polk really doesn't get his 54 degree of latitude nor his fight, but this is relatively a peaceful agreement. So Manifest Destiny continuing. If you look at this picture that is in the Capitol, it sort of paints a romantic vision of what Manifest Destiny meant to the average American. Notice how they're pointing westward. You have this colorful vision. You have the Rocky Mountains in the distance, and it looks like it's this great time in American history. But again, you can't neglect the plight of Native Americans. What's going to happen to Mexicans? I mean, literally, we are invading another country's territory. But nonetheless, Manifest Destiny very much fueled migration westward and desired for the country to further expand. So some of the major dangers of moving west, everything from Native American attacks to disease, scarcity of food. You had all these different things that you had to contend with, including the weather, animal attacks. If you've ever played the Oregon Trail, you know that little Susie has just gotten bit by a snake, and then like 2 days later on that game, she'll die. And that was a very realistic um, situation. So disease followed by Native American attacks are the top causes for dangers of moving west. And this map very much shows the physical terrain in which settlers would encounter everything from the Rocky Mountains to you have rivers they have to contend with, and this is unsettled land, so it's not like you're going to be able to stop at a rest area and everything's going to be great. And another trail that's heavily used is called the Santa Fe Trail. And this one was more used for economic purposes in that people would go to New Mexico, trade, and then a few days later head back to the United States. And one of the things that they use, as well as on the Oregon Trail, is something called a Conestoga, which would carry up to 6 tons, so that's about 12,000 pounds. That would be purposely used for trade because you're trying to obtain silver, gold, and fur and bring that back to trade within the United States. And then, of course, the Oregon Trail, going from Independence, Missouri to Oregon, basically your only route available. And the first people who actually go on the Oregon Trail are missionaries who try to convert and educate natives. And really what's significant about them is not that they're converting people or educating natives, but they showed that wagons were capable enough of going on the trail. Hence, think about to the game, right? If the path wasn't wide enough or you encountered brush, that would be a problem. But these missionaries very much show that it is a viable trail en route to the Oregon Territory. And typically you'd have caravans, which would consist of many wagons together for protection. So some might bring more food and supplies than others. And again, it's all that mutual protection. And you can see the stark amount of, or I shouldn't say stark, but the very high increase of migration to Oregon starting as early as the 1840s. You're around 1400, and that significantly builds up. By 1852, you have about 10,000 people now migrating there. So certainly a lot of migration going on there. And as I said earlier, disease being the number one cause of death on the trail, followed by Indian attacks, and then other ones dealing with freezing and the elements of the weather and things of that nature. Mormons also use the Oregon Trail. That's one of the reasons why you see such significant populations of Mormons, especially in places like Colorado and Utah and Wyoming. They use the Oregon Trail to escape religious persecution. So in sum, Americans head west, escape religious persecution, just like Mormons do, find new markets for commerce, claim land for farming, some just for seeking employment, locating harbors on the Pacific. Others just to spread the virtues of democracy. That's more of an idealistic reason. So you have a variety of reasons there. So now the crux of Manifest Destiny really deals with the Texas-Mexico boundary dispute. According to Texans, the boundary was the Rio Grande, and that's that river right here, which is the present-day border between Texas and Mexico. But according to the Mexican government, that was never agreed upon. It was the Nueces River, and you'll notice that is much further north. So this yellow portion here represents what the Republic of Texas looked like, hence the Lone Star Republic, right? And it's not until after the Mexican-American War that the boundary is going to be extended further south to the Rio Grande, as well as expanded further northwest. So what Polk does, he's called Polk the Purposeful for a reason. Remember, he does want to expand west, and one of the ways he does this is Polk orders 4,000 troops to cross the Nueces River, as if he's trying to orchestrate this plan in that he would have the Mexican troops fire upon the American troops. And that's exactly what happens. The Mexican army kills or wounds about 16 Americans, and this sets up Polk going back to Congress to say, hey, they just fired upon American soldiers. And his very famous line saying that to Congress, American blood has been shed on American soil, and nothing's going to outrage someone more than that happening, right? So we got to defend ourselves, right? And this is just boiling over throughout the United States. Americans, already want to expand west. Now you've just given us another reason to expand west because we've been fired upon on our own American soil. Well, really, was that really technically America's soil? Really not. And Congressman Abraham Lincoln, our future president, sort of is onto this. And he says, yeah, this doesn't seem quite right. And he demands to know the exact location in which American troops were killed. Nonetheless, and despite this inquiry, Congress is going to declare war. So as you can see here, this political cartoon showing Polk as a war machine, right? And he's going into Mexico now. This is Mexican territory, but again, under the whole guise and premise that Americans were killed on American soil, that we were basically invaded upon, when quite the opposite was true. Both sides during the Mexican-American War did see this as a moral cause. From the Mexican point of view, Texans were just the bullies of the North. Whereas from the American point of view, well, it's our destiny to expand west. It's what God wants us to do. So the Mexican-American War is underway, and the long story short, General Kearny marches 800 miles into North Mexico. He acquires it without even a single shot fired, which is extremely impressive with this 1,700 troops. Encounters very, very little resistance. In California, John Fremont, who was exploring the area and also had well-armed men, also helped to overthrow Mexican rule in that part of the Mexican territory in 1846. Him, along with General Kearny, meet up and make California independent, and California will become its own country as well for a little bit, and it's officially known as the California Bear Flag Republic, as you see depicted here. Other important victories that occur: General Taylor in Buena Vista, despite having a weakened force of about 5,000 men, he's able to defeat Santa Anna and his troops, who have 20,000 troops. So they are outnumbered 1-4. And Santa Anna is still trying to plug along, but it's General Taylor is somehow able to overcome 20,000 American troops, and Taylor will be known as the hero of Buena Vista for that victory. Along with that, General Winfield Scott, who was actually a veteran of the War of 1812, and has very few troops compared to the Mexican military, and despite disease and the mountainous terrain, he's actually able to capture Mexico City, and he's really one of the more underrated generals who's not really well known in history, but this is a significant capture, and this significantly weakens the Mexican army, and ultimately will force Santa Anna to sign 2 treaties. The first one being the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848, which will officially make the Rio Grande the southern border of Texas. It also requires for New Mexico as well as California to be given to the United States. In return, the United States will provide $15 million to the Mexican government, which is ironic because Polk had originally offered $25 million before embarking on this war with Mexico. Of course, at this point, Whigs, who despise expansion and call this a damnable war, are not happy with this. Meanwhile, Democrats, who are your expansionists, some go so far as to say we want to, take part of Mexico, present-day Mexico. So imagine if our boundary was even further south than the Rio Grande. Other fallout from the war: you have the Gadsden Purchase in 1853 for $10 million, and this ultimately allows Manifest Destiny to be complete. One of the reasons why the Gadsden Purchase occurs is because the Transcontinental Railroad really couldn't go through the Rocky Mountains, and this is where you would find the flattest and most viable land for building that. So this portion here is interesting, that you're paying $10 million for this little portion here, but with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, you're paying up to $15 million. So interesting there nonetheless. But the fallout from the war: you have 25,000 deaths on the Mexican side, but 13,000 on the U.S. side. And what's interesting there is that only 2,000 are directly correlated to the Mexican military inflicting these. 11,000 are from disease. So that really shows you how weak the Mexican military was. They suffered from weak leadership. Santa Anna was not a great general or leader, and that really showed from this war. So that's Manifest Destiny in a nutshell, and hopefully you have a clearer understanding of that. All right, thank you.